All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Vince and Ash and Milwaukee Pride for putting on this series. There's a whole talk series, and for inviting me. And thanks to Sojourner Peace House for offering a really great space. And thank you all for coming. If you brought along your general anxiety, or your social anxiety, or your seasonal depression, or skepticism, they're all welcome here. There's lots of space, and because this is a talk about emotional hygiene, all of your emotions are welcome here too, and you might have some reactions to the things I have to say. So I'm gonna invite you to settle into a mindful place and let your thoughts settle like dust. Make a quick inventory of all your daily worries and the things that are kind of going through your head, and see if you can set them aside for the next few minutes. So tonight I'm going to share some thoughts and what I hope is wisdom from my work with clients as a therapist to talk about emotional hygiene. So Vince asked me to talk about emotional hygiene because I'm a therapist, and I work with emotions and mental wellness. And when he first asked me to do this talk, I thought, well, he asked me to do a talk on emotional hygiene, and I thought, what's emotional hygiene? And at first I thought of like cleanliness, but that didn't seem like a really great way to think about our emotional lives. So I also didn't want to call it emotional wellness because it implies that emotional wellness is like the key thing, right? The thing that we're going after. And that's not always the goal, right? Being emotionally unwell or sick is inevitable, and it's very human. And as you'll see later, I think we should make room for sickness when it happens. Then it occurred to me, sort of all these things that we do that we call hygiene, like brushing our teeth or bathing or washing our clothes, are ways of caring for ourselves. So I invite you tonight to think about emotional hygiene as emotional care. And I want you to think of emotional care as something that happens in a community, even when you're by yourself. And I want you to think about this emotional care that happens in community as a practice that has nothing to do with how many bath bombs you consume and doesn't require you to buy anything. And this is a non-consumerist, community-driven emotional care that's a radical act when queer and trans people do it. So I want you to think of these thoughts that I share with you not as to-dos or things that you have to achieve, but as tools that you can use for building a world for yourself. Tailor them to fit your own world according to your time and your place and your ability and all your identities and all your limitations. I also realize that I'm about to send a lot of information your way, so I encourage you to take what you need and leave what doesn't stick. Or you can email me later and I'll give you the highlights. I'm also going to lead some very small, very brief experiential exercises. And it's your choice to participate or not, depending on where you are at the moment. And if your social anxiety just got tense when I said that, don't worry, you don't have to talk to anyone in order to do this. You can touch yourself. Now, I'm going to make some assumptions about emotions, or at least tell you where I'm coming from when I talk about emotions and when I talk about trans and queer experiences. First, I assume that every human person has emotions. And I assume that as a human you have all the emotions at some point in your life. I also assume that there's no such thing as a bad emotion or a good emotion. In fact, the more recent science suggests that all emotions come from the same faucet, so that if you try to turn off the bad emotions, you end up losing the good ones too. I also assume that any emotion you're having at any given moment is the exact right emotion that you should be having. Of course, the emotion might be confused about what time of day it is or where you are, but at least its perception of the situation is the right one. Emotions are loaded. I'm going to assume that emotions are loaded with information about our experiences and our past and our environment and our most deeply held beliefs, even the ones that we thought we'd left behind. Emotions point the way to what we value and what we long for and what we need and what we desire. I assume that trans and queer people are oppressed under an economic and political system that has very narrow views of gender and sexuality, and is often hostile to anything that is perceived as difference or inefficiency or nonconformity. Unless, of course, those things can be co-opted to make money, and usually not for trans and queer people, but for corporations. I also assume that we're in a constant state of vigilance about protecting ourselves from political and social, economic, physical, and sexual harm. We are doubly dehumanized by gender depression and the demands of late capitalism. This, of course, is compounded and made infinitely more complex if you're femme or a person of color or have a chronic medical condition or physical limitation or you're poor. So, how can we give emotional care to ourselves and others assuming all these things? And what does that look like? So first, I want to do a little exercise. So I want you to turn inward for a moment, and I want you to use your imagination here, kind of let it run wild. So imagine that you listen to this talk, and then you go home tonight, and you do all the things that you need to do, and then you go to bed at some point, and while you're sleeping, your fairy god person comes and does some magic while you're sleeping. Something happens, something changes. And when you wake up in the morning, you live in a world that is full of emotional care. You're receiving good emotional care, you're giving good emotional care. People are caring for you and you're caring for others. So I want you to just look around that world where this magic has happened and just take a look at what it looks like. Notice who you're with. Notice who you're not with. Notice where you are. Notice what kind of things you might be doing throughout the day. So to help us think about this world of emotional care, I want us to think through a lens of resilience. And resilience is a really hot word right now, and so you probably hear it everywhere, and everybody's got a lot of definitions about it. But in the science of ecology, resilience is the ability of an ecosystem to resist and recover from invasion. And I really love this definition because it values the importance of resistance. It also suits our purposes here because tonight I'm going to talk about rooting ourselves in our biological selves. A lot of discourse about human resilience focuses only on the recovery bit and not on the resistance bit. But we need resistance in our toolboxes. It's incomplete to only think about recovery, especially as queer and trans folk. So as I'm going through the rest of my talk, think about the ways that you might have in the past or might currently be resisting and recovering in the ways that I'm going to talk about. And my hope for this talk and for all of us is that we can own and stand in our own humanity as a way of resisting and recovering. So you're not a machine. That's the title of this talk. You're not a machine. You're not a factory. You're not a brand. You're a creature with wants and needs and desires and emotions. So the first tool for resilience is learning to talk to yourself and to your emotions. And I get a lot of side-eye when I first bring this up with the people that I work with. I say, well, maybe you could talk to your emotions, and they go, I don't know. It's really different from how we're taught to think about our emotions. But the Buddhist teacher Tara Brach talks about having your emotions over for a cup of tea. When you cultivate a practice of talking to yourself with openness and curiosity and without too much judgment, you'll get a wealth of information about yourself and others and the world around you. Because like I said before, emotions don't lie. The thoughts in our brains get overworked and muddled and confused. They're easily influenced by external pressures and demands and social conventions. But emotions tell the truth with an immediacy and a simplicity. They also want to help. They really do, even the ones that act scary or say really awful things. And they want to keep us safe and protect us from harm so that we can play and be creative. But when we're told by others that our emotions don't make sense, or they're too much, or that we're too sensitive about the things that we feel, or that they can't be trusted, we learn to ignore them. So when we ignore them, they sort of like start to tap us on the shoulder, and then we say, no, go away, I'm not going to deal with you. And then they start to say, hey, no, I really need your attention. And we say, no, go away, I'm too busy. And then they start to push, and then they start to shove, and then they start to take over. So when we start to treat our own selves as enemies full of bad emotions that need to be managed, so that's what we learn, but then we learn to talk to ourselves and our emotions, and then we build trust with ourselves. And it gives us practice in validating what we know to be real and true for ourselves. And it lets our emotions give us more information so we can make better decisions. Getting to know yourself will also help you attend to the damaging effects of trauma. After experiencing personal trauma and the collective traumas of homophobia and transphobia, our emotions might become overprotective or forget or know that it's 2019 and that we're relatively safe. So learning to talk to yourself in your emotions brings clarity to emotions that are stuck in the past, and clarity to the emotions that are telling us about stuff that's happening right now. Also, when we make this a regular practice, we actually start to like ourselves. When we start to talk to ourselves and get to know ourselves, we'll start to like ourselves. And we start to recognize that our emotions point the way to a really rich and creative and intuitive, curious self with wonderful qualities. And we start to follow our wants and desires and move toward our best selves. You'll start to begin resisting the dehumanizing, phobic narratives and recover with new stories. So before we move on, I want to give you a chance to talk to yourself. So if you want to take another moment to turn inward and just take a note of how you're feeling right now, and then say hello to yourself. Notice how your body feels when you say, hi, I know you're there. And then maybe you'll just let yourself know that you'll be back later, but you've got to listen. Another act of resilience is connecting with your body. And as trans and queer folk, our bodies are under constant surveillance and assault and questioning, and we're told that the bodies we have or the bodies we know we must have are bad. Oppressive forces often attempt or succeed in robbing us of agency over our bodies, or make us jump through costly and unnecessary hoops to take full ownership of our bodies. And as a result, we sometimes learn to disown them. That homophobic and transphobic trauma dissociates us from our bodies and our bodies to be, and mainstream sex and gender education denies us the knowledge or the permission to really enjoy our embodied selves. Taking ownership of trans and queer bodies is a radical act. It means treating them as precious and magical and mysterious and fabulous. Our bodies are really wonderful tools for resisting and recovering, whether it's in the streets at a protest or on the massage table. Your body will give you a wealth of information about what it does and doesn't like, what is safe and unsafe, what your deeply held beliefs about yourself, and how others have taught you to see yourself. It holds keys to your sexuality or your asexuality, your gender or your agender, and our bodies will tell us, often through discomfort, what needs to be different. Our bodies make every effort to heal. So I invite you to practice reconnecting with your body through movement and play and sex and dressing up and sensory activity. You might begin to explore or experiment with what makes your body feel different, how it needs to be fed and moved and cared for. This isn't just about body positivity, although it's part of it. This is also about learning about it, reconnecting with it so you can take more ownership of it. So you can learn where your boundaries are And there's so many tools for learning, and I'm not going to list them here because I want you to go try them on for yourself. And since we're all machines, we all have different bodies that have different needs. So if I tell you one thing here, it might work for one of you and not the rest of you, and the other way around. So what is your body saying right this very moment? Pay special attention to your eyes and your neck, your throat, your shoulders and stomach. Pay special attention to the squishy parts of your body. Look for a physical sensation like tightness, pain, relaxation, or tingling. Is it talking about a physical need? Is it pointing to an emotional experience? My third invitation to emotional care is that you attend to your seasons and your rhythms. So you're not a machine and you don't stay on all the time, right? In the post-industrial and digital age, we have lots of language about our lives that compares us to machines or computers. We talk about efficiency, our productivity, our bandwidth, our branding, and we do processing and we talk about data, and we start to demand that we always be on and always available and processing information precisely and consistently all the time. But you're a biological creature. You move in seasons, and your abilities and limitations change over time. Our emotional lives move in cycles throughout the day, the month, the year, over the whole span of a lifetime. And our bodies are linked with other living things, responding to the rotation and the orbit of the Earth. I'm really glad that we're in autumn because it's such a great season that really illustrates this point. Where we feel like a lot of those biological changes in really big ways. So, who else here wants to eat a huge pot of potatoes this time of year? Right, yeah. And, or you want to sleep an hour or two longer, but also maybe you're experiencing more sadness or grief because fall really those emotions really like the fall. We notice these changes in us just as the trees start to lose their leaves and the geese go south and the Earth's orbit moves away from the sun more often. So how often have you noticed a change in your emotional and physical life and then berated yourself for not being consistent? There's so many kinds of rhythms and seasons we experience, especially as queer and trans people. And in these times, we'll just need to make adjustments as we have the resources for them, as we're able, that honor and acknowledge particularly our emotional needs and wants. I included this act of resilience because as trans and queer people, our humanity and dignity is so often denied to us. We're told we don't exist, or we shouldn't exist, or that we're only there for the pleasure of people in power. So to own our creatureliness and our humanity is to stand in ourselves and our seasons and our transitions. Allowing ourselves to be creatures gives us dignity, and it allows us to be messy and complicated. It creates space for change, and it gives us more room for our emotions and our desires. So take another moment and consider what you need in this particular season. Which emotions tend to want attention during this season? And what changes might you have to make to your routine or your diet or your schedule to honor this particular season of yours? And what external forces might discourage you or prevent you from attending to and accommodating those rhythms? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the good stuff. I'm going to talk about boundaries. And people love talking about boundaries, and I hope I don't disappoint here. It's probably the number one thing that I talk about with clients, and it's absolutely the hardest thing to practice in life. Yet the practice is really rewarding and helpful in cultivating a rich emotional life and doing emotional care. And now you might have a leg up, because if you practice talking to yourself or connecting with your body or attending to your own rhythms, you'll have set the stage to set boundaries that are really flexible and create relationships that are full of mutual care. In simplest terms, a boundary is the place where I say yes or no or maybe, where I say that's okay with me or that's not okay with me. Or more broadly speaking, this is me and that's you. It sounds really simple, but we know how hard it is. And we know that it becomes even more difficult in a culture that's very comfortable making the rules for us, for telling us who we are and who we should be and what we should be doing with our bodies, or denying that we even exist at all. If we're from families that prohibited or controlled our gender and sexual expression, we might find it hard to even know what our boundaries are in relationships. Coercion in relationships is really common in our culture, and it also seems really hidden, but we learn to do it. But when I listen to myself and my body, and when I make space for my emotions and I treat them as important voices, then I start to really know who I am. And then I can say with clarity and confidence, I will not tolerate that and I want more of this. And it's infinitely more empowering to say, I won't talk about that than it is to say, don't talk to me about that, right? We can't set boundaries for people, but we can set boundaries for ourselves. And that's true because we're the best judge of what our boundaries should be. So boundaries are about trusting yourself and about your senses and your intuition. And in our language, the language that we use every day, we talk a lot about trusting other people, but I think that that's not quite right. We should talk more about trusting ourselves. So my best example of that is, sometimes I'm walking my dog and up ahead I see another owner with their dog, and as we approach, the other dog starts to yap and bark and kind of go nuts. And I think, my first intuition is to go, danger, right? Pick up your dog and go across the street. But then there's this other part that comes in me and says, well, don't be rude. That person's gonna think, badly of you. And then, maybe even the owner says, oh, don't worry, that's just how smart he is. He just likes to pretend that he's gonna bite your dog. But, especially in Midwest culture, we tamp that down in order to be polite, right? But who am I going to trust here? Am I going to trust the person that I know relatively well, me, or am I going to trust the person that I don't know? If I completely dismiss my own actions as unreal or overblown or silly, I might put myself and my dog in harm's way. But when I trust myself, my boundaries become more clear and more useful. This work takes time and practice, and it requires you to be kind and patient with yourself and even others, at least those who have deserved or earned your kindness and patience. People who are used to trying to set boundaries for you will often respond with fear, confusion, or hostility, and they might even respond the same way when you refuse to set boundaries for them. But as stressful as that is, when you have the clarity you need to really assess the relationship, but then you have that ability to assess the relationship. So is it working for you, and does it value your dignity and worth as a person? And you might decide to modify how you relate to some people based on that, and you might end relationships with others, and you'll have more space to make repair when things rupture. So boundaries are a powerful form of resistance and recovery. They help us create safe spaces for ourselves and others, which in turn create spaces for recovery from harm. They also help us navigate bigotry and ignorance, and all of us have had social interactions where people ask gross or inappropriate questions or demand that we educate them or justify our existence. But when we know where we stand and what's okay with us, we can more easily respond with integrity to refuse to put ourselves on the table for discussion. Of course, there may be times where saying no can be dangerous, and we know that there are many times people out there who are hostile and antagonistic toward our boundaries. So you might have not had the safety to say no, and I want to make it really clear that I respect that, your right to be safe and survive by any means necessary. When we do have the safety, we can be really creative with our boundaries. And Janet Hardy and Dusty Eden, the authors of The Ethical Slut, talk about how our boundaries allow us to say no, but when we learn to say no, then we also learn to say yes, right? We say no to the things that we don't want, but then we can also say yes to the things that we do want. So they give us greater control over our own sexual and gender expression. So, another inward moment. Take a moment to affirm that you're a separate person with your own set of needs and desires. And maybe you'll give yourself a compliment for the ways that you're currently honoring that separateness, the boundaries that you've set that you know are healthy and know are for you. And you might even think of a place where you want to say no. And you might even think of a place where you would want to say yes. The next act of resilience is reclaiming your right to be safe. So when we first become aware of our sexuality or our gender or the absence of, it's really quickly followed by messages of shame or denial or hostility. And this is what I call the gift of the closet. We don't ask for it, and life would definitely be better without it. But it does sometimes keep us safe. And when we make that courageous decision to come out and to live as ourselves, we often kind of think, okay, well now I'm done with that. I'm done with that, and now I kind of don't need it, and I'm out here. But this puts us in a really tricky bind, or forces us into kind of a terrible choice: our safety or our authentic selves. And I reject that that's a dichotomy, right? I reject that as a choice. I believe that being safe is a human right, and I believe that living as our authentic selves is a human right. Well, I think many of us might be able to point to a moment where we decide to live as ourselves in a big way, right? Our coming out moment. We're also making choices every day about coming out, or at least how to express our authentic selves. So, when I'm on the phone with customer service, I might think, do I call my husband and kind of risk, slowing this whole train down, or do I just want to get what I want to get and get out, right? So, that in a moment, I consider myself a very out person, but in that moment, I'm making a decision. And I want us to kind of de-shame decisions like that so that we can really honor our right to be safe. So I suggest that we reclaim our closets as places of resilience and as places of emotional care. Let's take our closets from the oppressors who made them and use them for our own purposes. So rather than seeing it as a place you get stuffed into by others, you might see it as a place of empowerment and recovery. You didn't make your closet, but you own it. I don't believe that living in the closet is the answer, certainly not because you're forced to. But I want to be careful and recognize that for many of us, coming out and living authentically is a life or death situation. And also, I want to recognize that many of us stay out and we have see-through closets. But I also don't believe that we have to be naive about the realities that threaten our safety and our emotional health. So why not use what we have available to us? I don't believe I'm obligated to give a really precious part of myself to those who will handle it roughly or with hate. There's so much external pressure from all sides about what we should be and how we should act. And so I believe that taking ownership of our closets gives us the choice about when we come out, our timeline for transition, and our terms for sharing those experiences with others. This ownership of our choices and how we present ourselves meets us where we are, and it validates whatever season we might be in. So I kind of think this is a bit of a fun exercise. So you might use your imagination again, and I kind of want you to imagine your closet as it is. It might be like kind of tight and dark and not very fun. So imagine yourself making this closet a place that belongs to you. kind of like decorating a room. You might make it a little bigger, or you might put up some posters, or you might make a place that friends can come over when you all need to be safe. You can make it really comfortable, a place for recovery, or you can make it kind of like a war room for planning resistance. And then from there, kind of think about what things are possible from that place. So a lot of this is kind of heavy, right? Our stories really often include really heavy emotions brought on by trauma and exclusion and violence. But this is a really incomplete picture, isn't it? We're humans after all, and we have all the emotions. So we do so much work fighting and educating and resisting and recovering and processing, so much work. I want to invite all of us to make room for celebration as an act of resilience. I'm so confident that each of us has so many things to celebrate and haven't done so or only minimally. There's nothing too small or too unusual or too universal to celebrate. It doesn't matter if everyone does it or you weren't the first or no one noticed. Did it move you closer to connecting with yourself or others in life-giving ways? Did it help you survive? Did it help you thrive? Then let's celebrate it. There's something really mind-blowing. You don't even have to have done anything to celebrate. You can just celebrate your own existence. Our queer hippie forefather, Walt Whitman, says, I celebrate myself and I sing myself. To not just affirm but celebrate yourself is, I think, the highest form of resistance to a transphobic and homophobic world. And I think celebration is absolutely critical in your emotional care routine. It balances things out, and it gives you clarity and perspective and builds confidence and competence. Now, a skeptical part of you might be saying, well, you know, in an age of forced positivity and our manic obsession with happiness, this invitation to celebrate might feel kind of phony. And I get that, and my answer is that this isn't about lying to ourselves or making ourselves feel better for what's wrong or what hurts. But this is about respecting and acknowledging the very real parts of us that have worked so hard to be more of ourselves, or even the fact that we're still here. So I also put celebration in the category of rest and recovery, resilient acts in a world full of overwork and shame. Now, some of us are notoriously bad at being able to identify causes for celebration, especially if we're familiar with burnout or perfectionism or shame. So I encourage you to reach out to people who know you really well, who can say, well, I do this with my husband. I'll kind of be like, oh, well, I'm feeling really bad. I'm not feeling good about myself, and I kind of don't know, I never do anything, right? And he'll go, well, what about last week when you did this? Or, he'll point out a quality that he really likes, and that's the thing that I need because I'm not able to do it in that moment for myself. So right now, I want you to go inward and name one thing that you can celebrate for yourself. And if you can't think of anything, think of just celebrating your own existence, your own self. And then maybe you'll take another leap and you'll decide how you want to celebrate it and who you want to celebrate with. So my final invitation is to be part of a community of emotional care. Doing emotional care all alone is impossible, right? And it's not very fun either. Even people who like to be alone a lot need a family to support and love them, and they need people to love and support. We have evolved as a species with a knack for cooperation and a deep ability to care for one another. And we trans and queer people are particularly good at creating community, so it's something that we've already got in our back pocket. Of course, some things like learning to talk to yourself, you have to kind of do yourself. But you can do it yourself with other people who are cheering you on. People you can share with and learn something new, people you can learn from and admire. And this might require that we practice some new skills. Some of us are really good at caring for other people and not ourselves. And some of us are really good at caring for ourselves and not other people. But community is the only way to learn these skills and to practice being in our bodies, talking to ourselves, attending to our seasons, making flexible boundaries, retrofitting our closets, and celebrating our those own happening. So I encourage you to make this a diverse community of people that you like and that you enjoy being with, that you enjoy and they're safe. Our communities can be small or big, depending on our own preferences and personalities. Make it a place where your contribution is valued and appreciated and used, where your qualities and skills shine. Maybe you'll do emotional care in several communities that overlap or are totally exclusive. You can include friends, family of origin, chosen family, colleagues, paramours and metamours, and teammates, or you can include paid professionals too, like therapists or nurses and doctors, or acupuncturists, massage therapists, the list goes on and on. That diversity will take pressure off of you and others to fill all the needs all the time, because you're not a machine, you can't do that. So, who are the people in your community? Is there anyone in your life now that you want to ask for care that you're not already doing? Or that you want to give care to? Is there anyone you want to be closer to? Is there anyone in that community that you want to be farther away from? Okay, so it's time one more time to use our imaginations. One final time. So go back to that world that you built at the very beginning. That world where some magic had happened overnight, and you were suddenly in a world of great emotional care. And kind of taking what you can remember. You don't have to remember everything, but taking what you remember from what I've just said. See if you can fill in the world a little bit more. See if you can make it that much richer. All right, thanks a lot for being here. I want to offer the opportunity for any questions, or we're in a small enough group, so that if you have like a comment or just anything that you want to reflect, now's a great time.
I really like the idea of the box coming, or the closet, and the idea of coming out of the closet and that being something bad that you want to leave behind. I really like the idea of it being part of a safe place, and to enhance that, I think it's just a great concept.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question or a comment. I'm non-binary and I'm deaf, so it's tough for me to understand how to set boundaries. But at the same time, I want to have a positive boundaries. What I mean by that is, I used to have all the trauma that I went through all my life, and it took a long time to work through my anger. Because really, sometimes being different, am I trans, am I non-binary, what am I? And it's a journey for me, but at the same time, what you said about the dog, you pick the dog up and you don't want to talk to that person. In the back of my head, I don't want to be rude, but at the same time, I'm setting boundaries. But it can be negative. Like, for example, they don't know that I'm deaf, and I don't need to talk to them. Maybe they're talking to me, but I can't hear them. So they think I'm rude. And I allow that to happen. But at the same time, how do you set positive boundaries? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's incredibly difficult, and again, I talk about this all the time, and I think particularly in our culture, in Wisconsin culture, being rude and setting a boundary often seem at odds with one another. They seem to clash. To say no to somebody very directly and clearly is often startling to people, or we worry that they're going to judge us or think that this person's, not very kind or not very nice, and being nice is like a golden rule here, right? So here's my short answer, right? Because this takes like a really long time and a lot of practice. My short answer is it takes a lot of practice saying no, feeling uncomfortable with saying no, and then continuing to say no even though you're uncomfortable.
Which means ignoring that person or continuing to be friendly. I mean, you don't have to walk across the street or keep walking past the dog,
Yeah.
That was barking at my dog.
Yeah. Sometimes it's, I think if I'm understanding it right, like sometimes there is a choice, right? Sometimes I might risk seeming a little rude in order to do what I know is really good for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know the look. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Ash.
No, it's all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I lost my train of thought there. Are you sure you don't want to say something?
Well, I'm struggling with that because I'm deaf and I'm non-binary, but I still question, am I really trans? And I have trans friends, and I'm still processing.
Yeah.
But what I'm facing, will I just face it and walk past that person, even wanting to risk it? Because if I walk across the street and ignore that person, I don't feel good about that. And I feel as like ashamed, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I'm struggling with that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned in my work, my own personal work setting boundaries, and then the work that I do with other people, is that setting good boundaries for ourselves often feels really uncomfortable for ourselves. And it's a lot of guilt can come up or shame. But with practice, I'm gonna bet some money on this, or I would bet money on it. The more you practice it, the easier it'll get, and the less uncomfortable it'll get over time. But again, don't trust me, trust you. Yeah. Did it come back to you?
Sort of.
Okay, yes.
I'm not sure it's the best question, but
Yeah,
I think
sure.
you'll probably know what I'm talking about. So I heard you talk a lot tonight about queer and trans bodies and our existence and sort of being bombarded with external messages about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know that it is or was true for me and is true for I think a lot of trans folks, at least those that I talk to, that there is a phenomenon of like hyper vigilance that we sometimes or often carry with us, or about our surroundings, and I think like both physical and emotional.
Right.
And I guess I just kind of wonder what you would sort of say about that. I mean, through a lens of resilience and
Yeah.
resisting
Yeah.
and recovery.
Yeah, thanks. I remember reading a study a few years ago that they did a study with queer people versus straight identified people, and they found that queer people were much better at reading faces and situations. We did it so much faster, right? And they had hypothesized that it's because we're put in situations where we need to read people very, very quickly. And so I want to first acknowledge that actually is a thing, right? We're just better at reading people because of our experiences. And I think part of that reclaiming the closet talk is about honoring that hypervigilance, and that it's something that if it's hyper, right, we need to be vigilant because we're not always safe, right? But that sometimes it does go into overprotective mode, and I think that can be a really hard thing to kind of parse out in the moment, right? Am I actually safe, or am I actually not safe, or am I kind of remembering something that's happened before or something that could happen? And that's where I think that talking to yourself part is really important, because the clearer we get about the messages that we're getting from ourselves, we might find that that the part talking to us in a situation is saying, oh yeah, this really reminds me of that thing that happened before, or the thing that I know could happen. But when I actually look around, I'm not seeing signs of it. Or it could say, this is something that's happening right now. And so I think when we learn to kind of talk to those things and get real clarity and get to know them really well, we can separate things out a little bit more clearly, so then we're not worried about am I just overreacting to this, or because those are sort of the messages I think that come with hypervigilance. Yeah. Does that make sense, or did I answer it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that what you just said about sort of talking to oneself to evaluate that situation, and, sort of grounding oneself, is this really happening? I mean, that phenomenon for me, very easily turns into the assumption or the belief. Essentially that I'm being persecuted by somebody. That somebody is in my presence and they're doing something, or they're a threat in some way. And often just working on that to somebody I'm with, somebody who knows me. And I'll often get back their much, I think, more objective, sort of assessment of the situation, and at which point I say, oh wow, you know what, I really need, it is really hard for me, even though I know that I experience this, to really be aware that that's happening in that moment, and then to not sort of ascribe some behavior or intent, on other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like what you said about trying it on or trying that out with people that you know, because that's a really safe way to do that, right? People that you know that you can trust to give you good information back is a great place to practice that. And the other thing that occurred to me as you were talking was that you won't always get that right? I might decide to retreat or keep myself safe, and then later on think, oh, I actually didn't need to do that. Or I might do the other way, but we tend to default to trying to keep ourselves protected. So I think that's okay, right? That you won't always get that perfect, and that's part of the practice and part of trying to figure those things out and get clarity about them. Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, I was. So, no, it's fine. I was going into, let me start over, I'm going to backtrack here. So I was going to a deaf event back in August, deaf banquet, and it's out of Milwaukee, and I was going into the women's bathroom, and there was an older lady there, and she came up to me and she looked at me and she said, "You're not a woman. This is a woman's bathroom." And she kept on and on. And it was the second time that happened. And it really hit home for me. But my friend was in the bathroom and was clueless about what was happening. And so I said, wait for me. because, you know, they were in the stall next to me, so I was kind of signing that person and saying, no, wait for me, and so as they were coming out and washed their hands, the lady was talking to my friend, and she was clueless about us being friends, this older lady, and she kept going on, and she was judging me with my friend. And my friend was very supportive and said, you know, she's a good friend of mine. I've known her for a long time, you know, and you don't have a right to say that. That's really not nice. And another woman or another person came in and saw us talking and looked at the bathroom sign, and I was wondering if they were in the right bathroom. And I looked to a different woman and I said, so now you're judging me? And I was just losing my mind. I was like, where are my boundaries? You know, I was already making a wall, you know, and that anxiety was very high. And so I apologized, but I realized boundaries, you know, it was like last minute, you know, this happened, it was unexpected, you know, the boundaries were my wall just to be safe, but at the same time, I decided to be straightforward and educate them as well, you know, and I realized I could have managed my boundaries while I was educating people, but I wonder if you know, if you've ever experienced that, or if you do that at something like that at the last minute.
Yeah, yes. That brings up a really great point that I didn't think of, which is that both of those things, keeping yourself safe, which you did, and educating at the same time, taking that risk, can happen at the same time. And you found a way in the moment to do that. So, I mean, I can hear in your story that you had a lot of presence, right? I mean, it might have been disorienting or stressful, but that you were able to do that in the moment is really awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Thanks for braving the 10-degree weather.